Good morning, everyone. Good to see you. A couple things to let you know. Hopefully your small groups have started meeting, so small group questions are out there on the table as you're exiting. If you're not involved in a small group, again, I would just want to encourage you to get involved in a small group. Come see me. I'd say Pastor John, but he's not here today. But come see me, and we could help hook you up into a small group. Also, out on the table there in the foyer, we have just a few shoebox kids in Honduras left, and we only have a couple weeks before all the boxes are due back here. So if you've not got one, or if you haven't signed your neighbor up yet, you can grab those out there and do that. But today we are continuing our series entitled Guardrails, and we're today going to be in the book of 1 Timothy, which is near the end of the Bible, end of the New Testament there. But I want to tell you something today, but before I tell you that, I feel like I need to give you some background before I tell you this. Because there's one thing that's happened in my life in the last 25 years that when I tell friends, they're just amazed. And so you may be surprised by it. Maybe you're not going to be surprised by it. But before I tell you, just to give you some background, I grew up in a home where my dad was a coal miner and my mom was a work-at-home mom. I learned very early on, you don't call them stay-at-home moms, or you don't call moms who stay at home that they don't work. Like, you learn very early, don't say those. So she was a work-at-home mom. My dad was a coal miner. We lived on a farm. We were not dirt poor, but we were lower middle class probably when I was growing up. So I didn't have a whole lot of money when I was growing up. And then when I went off to college, I had to pay for my way through college. And one year when I was at college in Lancaster, on Monday, Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturday mornings, I'd get up at 5 a.m. and drive from Lancaster to Harrisburg so I could work in a plumbing warehouse, so I could make money, so I could continue to go to school. And then at school, I met Beth, and we got married, and neither one of us had any money when we got married. And actually, after our wedding, we sat in the back room at the reception, and we started opening all the cards so that we had money that we could use when we went on our honeymoon. So that's how we paid for our honeymoon. And then after we had gotten married and were married for a few years, we moved to Washington, D.C., and I started seminary, and it was very expensive to live there. And when we moved in, all the people at the seminary said, all new seminary students need to know this. When you start seminary, either you're going to have a baby or your car is going to break down. It's just one of those things are happening. So we had been living there for 2 months. Beth came out of the bathroom and said, our car broke. No, she didn't say that. She came out of the bathroom and said, I'm pregnant. And I looked at her and I said, well, how did that happen? Okay. And which I probably need to go back and watch the message from last week. But anyways, and so she was pregnant. And then 3 months after she told me she was pregnant, our 1996 blue Dodge Neon broke down and we had to get another car. And so those few years when I was in seminary and all those things that were going on with kids and cars and all that, like, our budget was tighter than a clam with lockjaw. Like, that's how tight it was in our home. And then we, after I got out of seminary, I moved to Erie, and I was trying to start a church. There's not a whole lot of money to be made when you're trying to start a church. And so for the first couple of years, we actually lived below the poverty line of Pennsylvania. And so we were just trying to make ends meet. Now, that's the background. So what I want to tell you today is that in 25 years of marriage, we're going on 26 here next year, 25 years of marriage, Beth and I have never had one argument about money. We've argued about a whole lot of other things, but we have never argued about money. For over 2 decades, even though there were times in which we didn't have a whole lot and we weren't sure how we were going to pay the bills, we never argued about money. And we have beaten the odds. Because statistically, and you probably know this, they say that 40% of all divorces happen because of financial reasons. And so husband and wife, they start arguing about money. So every divorce that happens, typically 4 out of 10 of them are happening because they're arguing about money. And Beth and I have beaten the odds on that. And the truth is that many times people, their marriages will end, and the reasons why Beth and I have never argued about money is because we learned early on from our parents, who taught us very well, to develop financial guardrails. And those financial guardrails have protected us from going off into the ditch financially, because the truth is, every single one of us in this room, we all live off of a percentage of our income. Some of you may be living off of 70% or 80% or 90%, or some of us may be living off 100% of our income. Some of you may be spending 150% of your income, which is a pretty dangerous position to be in. But we all need to develop these financial guardrails in our lives. And so that because of that, the truth that I want to give you today that we're going to see here is that money can steal from you. There are people in my life who I know who have allowed money to steal from them. There's people who've allowed money to steal relationships from them, and their marriages have ended because of money. There's people that I know who've allowed money to steal from them emotionally, and every time you bring up the subject of money, they get all anxious and they're worrisome about their finances. Or I know of people who've allowed money to steal from them spiritually. That because, as we're going to look here in 1 Timothy, they've fallen in love with money, and it's caused them to drift away from some of the most important things in their life. And my fear is that you and I, if we don't develop guardrails around our lives financially, that you and I can allow money to steal from us. Now, this is part of our series, which we're going to wrap up next week, entitled Guardrails. And we've been looking at some very important things in our lives that need guardrails around them. As I started this series, we just looked in Proverbs and we saw that guardrails is really just the idea of acting wisely. And guardrails are there to direct and protect. And I remember back to that first week, I told you to begin asking yourself the question, what's the wise thing for me to do? Wisdom is not necessarily right or wrong, but it's what is right for me. And what's right for me may not necessarily be right for you when it comes to wise things. And so as we've gone through this series, I've asked you just to ask yourself the question, what's the wise thing to do? Because guardrails, nobody needs them, right? Until you need them, okay? And so guardrails are there to protect you, to direct and protect you from the harm that these things can do in your life. And so the next week, Doug, who did a marvelous job, he talked about time. And he shared with us that because our days are numbered, you and I need to number our days. That we oftentimes live as if time is going to go on forever. It's not going to go on forever, and we all have a limited amount of time here and now. We need to ask ourselves, what's the wise thing I need to do with my time? We encourage you, right, to think about things that you need to start doing, or things you need to stop doing, or things you need to do more of, or things that you need to do less of in light of the fact that our days are numbered. And last week, if you were here, we talked about how we are to flee from sexual sin. And we're not to try to debate with it or try to justify it or try to reason with it or try to stand against it, but we're actually to run away, to flee from sexual sin. I encouraged you last week to protect your purity, to just to develop those guardrails in your life. I gave you some of mine, but hopefully this week you talked about it and thought about it. What's some guardrails I need to put in my life to protect me and to protect my sexuality? And so we're really doing some hot button things. So last week we talked about things that people think the church is completely against it, which is sex. And if you remember last week, I told you God invented it, so it's really good. But today we're going to talk about money, okay? And people think, well, all the church wants is my money. And listen, today I'm not going to ask you to give anything to the church. I want something for you. I don't want anything from you today. And I want you to begin to develop guardrails around your life financially, because money ultimately can steal from you. And this whole series is based on our memory verse, which is found in Proverbs chapter 4. Let's all read it together. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. And as we wrap up the series, we're going to look at this verse next week. And so I want you to begin to develop guardrails, and today, especially when it comes to our finances. And as I said, we're going to be in the book of 1 Timothy there at the end of the Bible. 1 Timothy was a letter that was written by Paul to his protege, Timothy. And what had happened was, after Paul's first arrest, he was released from prison, and he began to travel around to some of the churches that he and his companions had started earlier. And so they started to visit these churches, and he visited the church in Ephesus, and there were some problems that were happening in this church. And so what Paul said, he took Timothy and he said, Timothy, I'm going to leave you here in Ephesus. I want you to be the leader here at the church. I want you to be the pastor here in the church. And I want you to really put in order some of the things that kind of have gone off the rails here, and to really put things back into order. And then Paul left Timothy there, and Paul then traveled to the region of Macedonia. And while he was in Macedonia, he wrote this letter to Timothy to kind of instruct him and encourage him and to give him pointers on how, as a young man, he was to lead and really shepherd the church there in Ephesus. And so right in the middle of this letter that he writes to his protege, he talks about the issue of contentment and finances and money and possessions. And he warns Timothy, as we're going to see here, Timothy, you need to be careful, because money can steal from you. So we're going to jump into it here, beginning in verse 9. And the first thing that we see here is the danger of money. In your home and in my home are a lot of dangerous things. You probably have in your home chemicals for drains and ovens and toilets. You may have paints or other things that are corrosive and maybe even flammable or explosive. And all of those things that you have in your house, probably somewhere on the container is a warning label warning you of the danger of using these products inappropriately. However, there is something even more dangerous that's in our homes, maybe even in our pockets today, or in our wallets, or in our purses, that is far more dangerous. However, that one object, that money that we carry around with us, as dangerous as it is, has no warning labels. And so what Paul did here is he began to give Timothy some warning labels when it came to the use of money. And so it begins in verse 9. And it says, those who want to get rich. Notice what Paul didn't say. He didn't say the danger here is those who are rich. He said the danger is here for those who want to get rich. In the original language, this is written in such a way that it conveys this idea. Those who want to live richly, which I think probably would include all of us. I think all of us, to some degree, want to live richly, right? We want to have the new house. We want to have the new car. We want to have the new phone. We want to have the latest gadget. All of us, probably to some degree or another, want to live richly. And Paul began here and he said, I'm warning you, if your desire is to live richly, you need to be very careful here, because there's some dangers associated with this thought and with this desire to live richly. He says, those who want to get rich, those who want to live richly, fall into temptation and a snare. Notice this. This verse is not written with an idea of uncertainty. Paul didn't write, those who want to live richer, those who want to get rich, might fall into temptation. He said, those who want to live richly will fall into temptation and a snare. He said, if it's your heart's desire to have the new house or the new car, or if that's what's the driving force in your life, he says, you need to be aware that you will fall. And that word fall means to be entrapped or to be overwhelmed with something. He said, you're gonna be trapped, you're gonna be overwhelmed, and you're gonna fall into a temptation and a snare. It's the idea of a bear that's looking for food and puts its paw into a trap, and now it's fastened there, it's trapped there. And that you and I probably know people, we may even be people, right, who have been trapped by money. There are people that I know who are trapped in a car loan, people that are trapped in a mortgage, people that are trapped in credit card debt. They're entrapped, they're overwhelmed by this, and it all goes back to that original phrase. It's all because we wanted to live richly. We wanted the new thing, we wanted the nice thing, and as a result, we were trapped. We fell into a temptation and a snare. And then Paul went on. He said, those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a snare, and many foolish and harmful desires, which plunge men into ruin and destruction. That word plunge is a word that was used in Paul's day to talk about a ship that was sinking. It was going to go under the water. It was going to go into the deep. And he said, when we want to live richly and we fall into temptation and a snare, there are many foolish and harmful desires that cause us to sink into ruin and destruction. And we've seen this. Maybe you've experienced this in your own life, but we've seen this time and time and time again of people who desire to live this way, and they plunge themselves into ruin and destruction. In 1995, professional boxer Mike Tyson, they estimate, had a net worth of not a net worth, but they estimate that he had $300 million in the bank. That's how much cash he had in the bank. However, by 2003, Mike Tyson was not just broke, but he was also in $23 million worth of debt. So in a span of about 8 years, Mike Tyson went from having $300 million to owing $23 million. And you have to ask yourself, how does a person go through $325 million in less than 10 years? And it's pretty easy if you were living like Mike Tyson, because there are the stories of his financial recklessness are just staggering. It's estimated that over the course of those 8 years, Mike Tyson spent $4.5 million on cars and motorcycles. He bought 19 cars for friends of his. It's also reported that during this time, he spent $100,000 a month on jewelry and clothing. I don't know what your clothing budget looks like, but mine's nowhere near $100,000 a month. He spent $400,000 on Siberian tigers and other exotic animals, and as a result of that, he had to pay an animal trainer $125,000 a year just to care for the animals that he had purchased. On top of that, he had purchased homes in Connecticut and Maryland and Las Vegas and Ohio. And there's the pictures of the houses that he purchased. And they report that inside of these houses was gold-plated fixtures. And now you can understand how he went through $300 million in less than 10 years. And it's all because he did not have any financial guardrails. You see, it doesn't matter if you're poor or rich or filthy rich. If you don't have financial guardrails, you need to be careful, because money can steal from you. But Paul went on, and he didn't just give the danger and warn us of the danger of money, but he talked about the damage of money. And actually, we're going to see here why this is so dangerous for us. Because the danger of money is that it causes great damage to each of us, and there's the potential that money can damage us in the entirety of our being. It can damage us relationally, it can damage us emotionally, it can damage us even spiritually, that we're going to see here in these next couple verses. And so he begins here and he says, it doesn't matter if you're poor, or if you're middle class, or if you're upper middle class, or if you're rich, or you're filthy rich. It doesn't matter. If you don't put around financial guardrails around your life, there is some damage that money is going to do to you. And so he begins in verse 10 with the word for. Now, anytime you see the for, you got to see what's before the for, okay? And basically, he's just referring back to what he just said in the previous verse, that, those who want to get rich, you need to be careful, because you're going to fall into a temptation, a snare, and you're going to plunge yourself into destruction and ruin. And he says, for that reason, look what he says, the love of money. The love of money. Now, this is one of the most mistranslated, misinterpreted verses in the entire Bible, because I hear people misrepresent this verse all the time. They'll say the money is the root of all. That's not what it says. Look at what it says. It doesn't say money. Money is an inanimate object, okay? Money cannot be good or evil. Just like a rock cannot be good or evil. So money is not good or evil. Look what he says. He says the love of money. Now, I guarantee that if somebody were to ask every one of us in this room, do you love money? I know what all of our responses would be. We'd be like, nah, I don't love money. I mean, I like money. I'm kind of infatuated with money. And money and I are in a dating relationship, but it's not exclusive. I don't love money. Like that, none of us would admit that we love money. But here's how you know if you're in love with money. Because when you think about love, what does love cause you to do? Love causes you and I to do stupid things, okay? We all do stupid things because of love. Beth and I, after we had been dating for 1 month, I bought her 2.5 dozen roses. We'd only been dating a month. I bought her 30 roses, one for every day that we were dating. Like, how stupid is that? Okay? Right before we got engaged, I was living in Western Pennsylvania and she lived in St. Louis. It's a 10-hour drive between those two locations. One night I wanted to have dinner with her, so I got in my car. I drove 10 hours to St. Louis. I had dinner with her. The very next morning, I got up early in the morning and I drove back home just so I could have dinner with her, because that's dumb, okay? That's just stupid, okay? There are times now that I'll be sitting in the house and I have my pajamas on. I'm ready to go to bed. And she'll look at me and say, I could really use some ice cream right now. And so in my pajamas, I go down to Martin's so I can buy her ice cream because I love her. Now that's stupid, okay? But I do it because I love her. Now, that we put that into context, think about all the stupid things you and I have done for money, or stupid things that we've done for stuff. The stupid financial mistakes we've made so that I could get the car, or the stupid things I've done financially so I could get the house, or the stupid financial things I've done so that I could get the new toy. We've all done stupid things financially, because if we were completely honest with ourselves, we'd say, I kind of love money. I kind of love stuff. And because of that love, look at what he says the damage is. For the love of money is a root of all sorts of evil. You see, when we fall in love with money, we set ourselves up for evil. And this is why there are people who will lie and cheat and deceive and exploit other people so that they can just get money. For the love of money is the root of all sorts of evil, and some by longing for it. The word longing means to reach out to touch something. Have you ever longed for something? And he says there are some who were longing for stuff, and they were longing for money. You know, how oftentimes have you longed for the new car? You've longed for the new house. You've longed for the new thing. He says, some by longing for it, look at what he says, have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. Paul said there are people, maybe the people that he knew, maybe people that Timothy knew, maybe people who were part of that Ephesian congregation at the time. And he said, there are people that I know that they fell in love with money and it caused them to wander away from the faith. As a pastor, I see it all the time, that there are people who fall in love with stuff and they have no time for church, they have no time for spiritual things, and just slowly but surely they wander away from the faith. And look what he says, and pierce themselves with many griefs. Money didn't do it to them. He said they did it to themselves, and the grief and the pain and the anguish as a result of the love of money. And basically what Paul is telling Timothy, and by extension you and I today, is just simply this, is that money can steal from you. It can steal the things that are most important to you. It can steal the things that are most precious to you. It can steal your time. It can steal your relationships. It can steal your spiritual life. It can steal from you. So, because all of that is true, what should you and I do? And I want to encourage you today to, as we develop guardrails around our lives financially, is just simply to master your money. Because the truth is, if you don't master your money will master you. It's going to be one or the other. Either you're going to master your money or your money is going to master you. Jesus put it this way in Matthew chapter 6, verse 24. He said, no one can serve two masters. Either he will love one and despise the other, or he'll be devoted to one and reject the other. And then Jesus said, you cannot serve God and stuff. Jesus talking to his disciples, and he wasn't concerned that they were going to reject him and go worship Satan. He was concerned that money would crowd out their their devotion to him. He said, you can't serve God and money. You can't serve God and stuff. You're going to have to make a choice here. And basically what Jesus is saying is what Paul said, is that you've got to master your money or your money will master you. Because if you don't master your money will steal from you. It's going to steal your devotion to Jesus. It's going to steal your spiritual life. And so he said, you can't serve two masters, so master your money. And so I just want to give you like a few handles here. What do I mean by this? So first of all, I think you need to budget your money. Now, every time I talk about developing a budget, I know the same stories I get from everyone. I don't make enough money to budget, or I make too much money to budget, too much time to budget. Listen, in and you track how much you spend. It's just that simple. Now, I get it. It does take some time to do it. It may cause you to feel a little bit guilty when you realize, whoa, I can't believe I spend that much money a month on that, okay? And so there is that, and it does take time. You got to think through from you. Your money is going to ultimately master you. So develop a budget. And there's a very simple app that Beth and I use. We can download it on both of our phones. You use the same login information, and it's called EveryDollar, everydollar.com. You can use it on your laptop, you can use it on your iPad, you can use it on your phone. And like I said, Beth and I have the account. We use the same login information. And then anytime we spend something in the store, we put in the EveryDollar app, and then the other person, when they open their phone, they can see how much money is left in the budget for those items. And so you just track those things, okay? So I want to encourage you, if you're going to master your money, first of all, you got to develop a budget. Second of all, if you're going to master your money, you've got to get out of debt and stay out of debt, okay? The tragedy of the American culture is that so many people are spending more money than they have, okay? Pastor John and I were talking about this message, and he said, you can make this pretty simple. Just get up in front of everybody and say, don't spend more than you make, and then pray, and then everybody leaves, okay? Right? Because it's that simple. But I told John, I said, listen, debt and finances and budgets, it's not a math issue, right? It's a heart issue. We go into debt because it's a heart issue. And so some of you may need to develop a guardrail here and say, I'm going to cut up the credit card, or I'm not going to use the credit card. Or you know what, that next big purchase I'm going to make, I'm going to actually save up for it. Some of you need a guardrail to say, hey, I'm going to develop a budget. In light of this budget, I'm going to monitor what I spend. Maybe I'm not going to go buy that $7 Starbucks coffee now. Yeah, some of you do that. I know that, okay? Or hey, instead of buying the brand new tool, maybe I'll buy a used one, okay? But then begin to develop a budget, stay out of debt. And then number 3, this is so key. This is where the heart comes into it. Learn contentment. Just learn to be content with what you have. Paul said in Philippians chapter 4, verse 11, he said this, hey, I know what it's like to live with a lot. I know what it's like to live with a little. And then he said this, he said, I have learned to be content. It's not something that comes natural to us. Paul said, I had to learn it. And so how did he learn it? Well, if you go back to the beginning of, just up above what we read here in 1 Timothy, he said this in beginning of verse 7, chapter 6, verse 7 of 1 Timothy, for we have brought nothing into the world, so we cannot take anything out of it either. If we have food and covering with these, we shall be content. I think Paul learned to be content because he came to the realization, stuff never satisfies. And that you can accumulate all the stuff. You can have the nicest house, you can have the nicest car, you can have all the stuff, you can have a big bank account. But listen, in 100 years, for all of us in this room, in 100 years, all of that stuff is either going to be owned by someone else or on the junk pile. It's going to be in one of those two places. Because in 100 years, we can't take it with us. So just learn to be content. Because money can steal from you. So master your money. And imagine if we got hold of this. Imagine the peace that would come into our life and your life when we just made the commitment to master our money instead of allowing our money to master us. The changes that could happen. Now, again, listen, If you notice, not one time in this message did I tell you need to give to the church or anything like that. Because again, I don't want anything from you. I want something for you. I want you to develop financial guardrails so that you can live in the freedom that is accompanied by those financial guardrails. Because I do know, just as you know, that money can steal from you. So master your money. And you would be glad that you did. Father, we thank you for your word today. I thank you just again how applicable your word is to every area of our life, even down to the point of finances. And I thank you that when we think of finances and generosity, that as Doug shared with us this morning, that you have exemplified the picture of generosity. That when you came and you gave your life as a ransom for many, you gave up everything in order to redeem us. And that when we live with financial guardrails and it affords us the opportunity to be generous, that it's those moments that we begin to look most like you. And so I pray for anyone here who just needs a heart change when it comes to trusting you as their Savior, or a heart change when it comes to their finances. God, I pray that you would just continue to work and move and form us more and more into the image of Christ. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.